What are the steps involved with breaking away from a wirehouse to transition to the RIA model? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 133. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where we help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all the resources we make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. We have articles, we have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on today's episode, we are talking about if you are in that wirehouse model, that W-2 broker-dealer model, and you are thinking about going on this RIA path, well, what are the various steps involved with making that sort of change to your practice? So a lot of information we're going to cover on this, but this is really meant to just help you understand there is a process out there. You do need to follow the process. You need to be aware of the process. And not to give some sales pitch, but that's certainly what I can help you with is walking you through all of this. But this is going at a high level to get you start thinking about what some of those initial steps are. So for starters, think about there's kind of three main decisions, if you will, that go into should you transition your practice to the RIA model, and in this context, coming from a wirehouse breakaway type scenario. So the first one is, should you even be doing this? Yes, the RIA model is the fastest growing channel in the industry. It has been for several years now. Yes, you're probably seeing all kinds of news about teams of all sizes, smaller teams and very large teams breaking away to the RIA model. Yes, you've probably heard that the economics are supposedly better, the flexibility is better, but is it necessarily a fit for your practice? So the first thing you need to do is understand, okay, I've heard all this stuff, but realistically, how would it look for my particular practice? Is my particular practice even a good profile for the RIA model? And that's based on literally the types of clients you have, the services you offer, the investment solutions you use, what you are desiring to do or not as part of being an advisor, and saying, hey, does that even fit the RIA model? Because the reality is if it's not a fit for the RIA model, you don't need to worry about all the other steps and variables we're going to be talking about in this episode. So first decision is getting that initial education. Should you even be exploring this further? Is it a potential fit for your practice? That's number one. Number two is to then understand this three main pathways at that just kind of generic level of how to transition into the model. I help you down all three, or could help you down all three, could help you explore all three. So my comments are never meant to suggest that one is better than the other. All that matters is for your individual specific practice, which one is better. But advisors of all sizes go down all three or consider all three. So at a very high level, the three are on one end of the spectrum is you start your own RIA and you build out the necessary solution providers around that. On the other end of the spectrum is you join an existing RIA platform. Don't come into this with any sort of preconceptions of what that means. There are several different flavors of that, some that you would find very attractive to consider, some that you wouldn't want to consider at all. And it usually comes down to, again, what you're trying to accomplish at this point in your career. So it's not to say that they're bad RIAs, but it might be just not at all the model you're interested in. You're not perhaps interested in selling your practice at this juncture in your career. Well, guess what? That exists. That's a flavor, but that's only one of the flavors. So just come into it open-minded, but on that other side of that spectrum is potentially joining an existing RIA platform. And then the third one is in the middle. That is where you have your own RIA, but as opposed to working with perhaps 10 different vendors, providers, solution providers, you work with one that bundles up about 80% of what you need and provide that all with that single point of contact. Again, pros, cons to all three, but notice I have not mentioned any specific firms of who provides for those, because at that second decision point is just understanding, okay, at a generic level, how do these work? What are those three They all have pros and cons. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're not being truthful, or they're just simply not aware. By the way, wherever you are now has pros and cons that you would want to consider and weigh against this. But it's really interesting, okay, which of those three is perhaps the way you're initially leaning? Everyone kind of starts in one direction, and then as you go through this discovery process, you might find yourself, after you kind of learn more about this particular path, maybe you say, okay, hey, actually, now that I've kind of learned about that, I want to actually go in this direction. Again, that's part of the discovery process, is learning how those work. And then the third step is, after you kind of figure out which direction, at least initially, that you're leaning in, is now to say, okay, well, who are the solution providers that can support me as needed to get me along that path? So if it's perhaps joining an RIA, well, okay, well, who are the RIA platforms out there that have that flavor that is going to be appealing to me at this point in my career, and why might I choose one over the other? As just one example of the decision on that path. Or if you're having your own RIA, okay, what are the different pieces that you need to put together? Who are those solution providers? And again, the same with that middle ground. But you don't need to worry about the specific solution providers just yet until you make sure, again, you've even got past steps 1 and 2. So these 3 steps are all in that order by design. If you can't get past step 1, there's no reason to go to step 2. And likewise, can't get past 2, there's no reason to go to step 3. So that's at a high level, the decision process, the high level steps you would go through for breaking away from the Wirehouse to transition into the RIA model. But I do want to give you some examples of some of the various steps, if you will, or things that you will need to solve for, kind of regardless of which of those 3 paths you potentially go down. It's just a matter of, perhaps, are you piecing those together, or is some sort of platform you've joined, or a support platform, bundled up some of those for you? And so, to give you a couple idea of what these variables are, this is not an exhaustive list. This is a big part of what I help advisors and teams understand is, okay, what do you need to know? What do you need to solve for? Who are the vendors out there? What you can expect from a price perspective? What you can expect from a timeline perspective? But at a high level, the way to think about this as that breakaway advisor is, what does my current firm provide for me now? And then how will I replicate that on my own in that more independent space? And we're going to assume, for the sake of this exercise, that you're either starting your own RIA, or if you're joining a platform, it's on a 1099 basis. So you're responsible for you're often for your so-called local expenses. I did an episode on that recently. But think of that as more of the independent route. If you were to go and join an RIA and be as a W-2 advisor, or sell your practice to an RIA, it's going to be a different kind of exploration process. But think of this more on the independent realm. So it's, okay, what does my current Wirehouse firm provide for me now? How will I replicate on my own? So just to give you a couple examples of those variables, often the biggest, or one of the biggest ones, is the office. So if you're a Wirehouse advisor now, they are providing you some sort of office facility, generally a conference room, maybe a place for team members to sit. And so the question is, if you aspire to still have an office going forward as an independent practice, and typically folks do now, there are more and more RIAs that are 100% virtual, but generally people want to have some sort of office footprint. So how are you going to procure that on your own? And there's all kinds of pros to why you might want to procure your own real estate footprint on your own, but it does come with responsibilities. It does come with a process. So that is one of the big ones, one of the big steps that you need to understand to break away and go on an RIA path is, how would I procure my own office footprint, and what are all the options with that I want to be considering? So that's one of the big ones. Another big one is, what custodian are you going to use? So your assets are currently held at your breakaway firm. You are going to need a place to custody your client assets. And there's several different custodians to choose from. I've done different episodes on perhaps how you choose a custodian. And they typically have a unique place in the marketplace of what type of advisor team they appeal to. And so you want to understand why one might be a better fit for you than another. Now, long term, you might even be, as they say, multi-custodial. You might even have more than one custodian. And typically, larger RIAs do ultimately have more than one custodian. But initially, as part of a transition, in large part for operational logistical simplicity, you would want to be starting with one custodian. And so part of this exercise, again, breaking away, your wirehouse currently custodies the assets for your clients. How are you going to custody your assets? What custodians do you have available to choose from? Why you might choose one over the other, and how they differ. Kind of related on the custodian front, because keep in mind, that is for your advisory assets, would be held in as we refer to a custodian. You might also have remaining broker-dealer commission assets. And as I talk about frequently on these episodes, you do not have to be 100% fee only to potentially consider going down this path. You can potentially try to, as I have to say, solve for your remaining broker-dealer assets. Perhaps there's ways to transition some of that more into a fee-based solution. But for some of you, it's a big enough part of your business and or you aspire to continue to be able to offer certain brokerage commission products going forward. That is generally always doable. Now, I say generally because there are some variables involved in that, and the size of how big of that your practice is. The typical solution providers you can lean on typically have minimums. But if you have a reasonable amount of commission assets and you need or want to retain that going forward, that's another thing you'll need to solve for. Again, what is my broker-dealer solution going to be for those particular assets? Another example of a variable to solve for is your often referred to as tech stack. So in some ways, you might join a custodian that provides you with the bulk of the technology you need. Other custodians have a more approach. They say, hey, we just, instead of providing you more ourselves, we just try to integrate with as many of the third-party providers out there in the marketplace. You go out there, you pick the best in breed from all the solutions you want, and we will help you build this tech stack to then integrate with us as custodian. There's pros and cons to both of those approaches. That's certainly something I can walk you through of why you might choose one approach over the other approach. But technology will be a big part of this, whether you're getting it directly from a custodian or you're piecing third-party tools together, or more often there's some combination of those both. It's, okay, I'm getting technology from my current firm, for better or worse, whatever degree of technology that is. How will I have a CRM? How will I do financial planning? How will I manage and trade the portfolios? That's all thought of in that tech stack realm in the independent space, the RIA space. Again, that's the thing I'll walk you through, help you out understand how that works. Another big one, and this relates to if you have your own RIA, is the option just referred to as compliance of it. So how will you both register the RIA on the front end, and then how will you manage your regulatory and compliance responsibility going forward? This is not something you should fear, and I'll wrap up with kind of what the naysayers point out. Oftentimes people at your firm say, oh, you will get buried in compliance. You'll spend all your time in compliance. Oh, the SEC will come after you. That's all a scare tactic. Now, you do need to take all this serious. You do need to understand what that responsibility is. You do need to understand the vendors that help you manage that and what you can expect from them, what you can expect to pay for that service. But it is all entirely doable, albeit there's more responsibility than you likely have now, but that is something you need to solve for. Now, that again is if you have your own RIA. An example of one of the comparisons, if you join an RIA, that is part of their value prop is they are taking that compliance responsibility off your plate. They are doing it for you. Now, you might say, well, which one's better? There's no perfect answer to that. It comes back, again, to each individual practice. What are you able or willing to handle yourself? Do you need to handle compliance yourself? Sometimes there's certain circumstances that are just not a fit for joining an RIA where you can essentially outsource the compliance. So again, you want to understand how does this work? How does it vary between the different pathways, pros, cons, and which one might be the best for your practice? But again, compliance, however you solve for it, is another big step in this process. Just kind of two smaller pieces to this, but still very important. But just to lay out some of these variables, you will, if you're starting your own RIA, have to procure your own E&O policy. So you've probably always had built-in E&O that you didn't really have any say in, and there perhaps is a standalone cost that's assessed to you, and here's the terms of the coverage, and it's been provided for you. And that is nice, that's been provided for you, but you don't necessarily have any flexibility or say in that. In the independent space, if you start your own RIA, you are procuring that on your own. Again, nothing you should fear. It's just a matter of knowing how that process works, what kind of coverages you need, who you lean on to get it, the process involved. And again, if you're joining an RIA, that's typically part of what they're providing. So again, different pathways have different ways to approach this, but obtaining E&O in one fashion or the other is another step. And then the last kind of step I'll just point out here with these variables, again, not an exhaustive list, is marketing. So if you're at that Wirehouse captive world, you have probably been able to do very little marketing. And when I say marketing, that's everything from the website that you have, which is probably not your own website, a brand, which is not your own brand. It might be some byline of the parent company. And then your marketing approaches. So perhaps you do aspire to have a podcast or make videos or put out white papers or have a blog. All of those things you typically need to solve for. Now, that doesn't mean you all have to solve for them right from the jump. Things like a website you would want to have right from the jump. But again, that's another piece. And that's not as much replacing something your Wirehouse is giving you, because they're probably giving you little to none of that, at least from a flexibility standpoint. That is taking advantage of your newfound flexibility in the independent space to really build a business, build a brand, put your name out there. It's all through that kind of marketing apparatus. Again, just a matter of understanding what needs to be solved for, who can you lean on, what's that process. And then it's not really a variable in the sense of what your current firm provides for you, but certainly an important piece of this process when breaking away is also to make sure you are going to successfully navigate the legal considerations of breaking away. So that is understanding what is your current agreement with your Wirehouse firm. For some of you, you might have signed something a very long time ago that you maybe don't even have a copy of. Others, you might have a copy. It might have non-solicit language. Perhaps you acquired a practice at some point and you signed something related to that. Maybe you're still burning off a transition assistance vest period because you joined the firm 6 years ago and you signed some 10-year commitment on it. These are all things that it is an important process. The breaking away from a Wirehouse is to work through that, understand that, get the needed legal advice on how to navigate that safely. And again, there's nothing to fear. You just need to know, okay, who can you lean on for that advice? When in the process should you be getting the advice? And you need to make sure that you then follow that advice. So while it's not replicating, certainly your current firm is not providing you breakaway legal advice, that is an important step in this process nonetheless. And then I'll kind of wrap up. And again, I've touched on all this at a fairly high level, but the wrap up here is just to say, and I've alluded to it, is do not fear this. If you've made it this far in the episode, you clearly have some interest in exploring an RA path for your practice. And I've rattled off, wow, all these decisions you need to make, these variables you need to solve for. Yes, you do need to do all that, but it is entirely manageable. But you will always hear people trying to scare you out of it, typically coming from your current firm now. They will try to tell you, again, you'll get buried by compliance. Oh, you'll never have the scale that we have to get some of the resources. They'll artificially say the technology is not as good, which, by the way, I've talked about in various episodes. That's not at all the case any longer. It perhaps was 20 years ago. It's the exact opposite now. So you will hear a lot of scare tactics telling you why you shouldn't do this or you can't do this or why it's not going to be good for you or your teammates or your clients. Put all that aside. At least educate yourself. You're watching episodes like this. That's a good starting point, is to know, okay, how does it actually work, regardless of what these people are chirping in my ear, and is it a fit for my practice? So one, just beware of the naysayers. Number two, just know that the industry has evolved tremendously over the last 5, 10, 15 years. There are all kinds of support platforms. Sometimes you'll hear supported independence. I've done an episode on that. That to the degree you say, wow, I want a lot of these benefits. I want the better economics. I want the better flexibility. But Brad, you just rattled off all kinds of things. And I get some of those I need to be responsible for under any circumstance. But if there's pathways where I can outsource more of that to someone else, perhaps the compliance, managing the tech stack, figuring out the E&O, there are some wonderful supported independence routes. That's, again, that second or third bucket that we talked about earlier that can help you with that. So don't let any of all the topics I've kind of thrown out there today intimidate you thinking you can't solve for it. Now, some of you will go through this whole process, learn everything, and absolutely want to still do everything on your own. And I can absolutely help you with that path. Or you might say, okay, Brad, help me understand that, but also let's compare it to some of these supported approaches. And to be determined, but you might decide that some of those are a better pathway for you as well. It's worth understanding how they all work. Again, pros, cons to all of the approaches. And then the last thing, just to tie a bow on it, is again, that's what I'm here to help you with. You should not be overwhelmed by any of this. You should not be intimidated by any of this. But the reality is, if you're a wirehouse firm and you want to break away and go on a transition to the RIA model, you likely, almost assuredly, have never done that before, right? I couldn't even tell you an instance of an RIA advisor that has been in the RIA model and has gone back or to the wirehouse model. That in and itself is very telling. You should think about what that means. But the idea being, you likely, assuredly have never done this before. You will only most likely do this one time in your career. You need advice from someone like myself that has done this hundreds of times and hundreds of conversations a year to help you understand how all these options work and to just walk you through the process. You do not need to fear it. You do not need to be intimidated, but you do need to take the time for someone that has done it, someone that has extensive experience doing it, to walk you through it and help you fully understand all the options. And as the title of the episode is, all the steps involved as well. So like I said at the top, my name is Brad Wales with Transition to RIA. Again, happy to have this type of conversation with you, whether you're at that very first part of that process, at the very first step I talked about, or you're already kind of decided maybe you want to go on this path, but you still have all these variables to think through. I'm happy to have that conversation with you as well. First things first, though, head on over to the website, transitiontoria.com. You can find all the resources. Again, this entire series is in video format, podcast format. There's articles, there's white papers. And at the top page of every page is a contact link. Just click on that and you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.